Well, let's go to Mark chapter 14. If you remember very briefly, those who were here, Mark 13 is this narrative, this mini apocalypse that stands out, not totally, but to a degree, independent of the whole gospel. You read Mark 13 as one big unit, because Mark 11, all the way up to chapter 12, rather, flows, and then you just pick up in chapter 14. In chapter 14, to the end of the gospel, we're on the home stretch. This is typically what we call the passion narrative. Passion narrative, of course, from the Latin passio, which means to suffer. So if someone has a big passion for something, it's like saying they really suffer for something, right? If you'll notice in Mark's gospel, and Matthew and Luke do the same thing, in Mark's gospel, that the time frame is fast. It's always immediate. When it gets to the passion narrative, time starts slowing down. You have an evening, then another evening. By the time you get to the crucifixion, or the trial scene crucifixion, it's the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, 9th hour. And it just really slows down. I could go on for a long time, but I won't because I'm going to stick on Mark. But scholars for a long time have noticed that this passion narrative, there are a lot of telltale signs that it's very ancient. And most scholars concur that probably the earliest oral tradition about Jesus is the passion narrative. And I find that very convincing for a lot of reasons, but main reason I think that makes the most sense. I think when people start talking about Jesus' death, start talking about his resurrection, they started with his death and resurrection, and they memorized very clearly what happened, what led up to his betrayal, death, and then lead up to the resurrection. And so this, it has, well, I said I wouldn't do it, and I won't. There's a lot of signs that it seems to demonstrate that is more probable. And so this probably was a very, very ancient oral sermon. If you ask a person on the streets or a message, right? Morning, someone said, who's Jesus? Nazareth? What happened to him? Well, it happened like this. Around Passover, and it kicks on from there. Before then, the events are not chronologically aligned that much. Remember, there's a lot of freedom moving stuff around or putting together a whole bunch of salt sayings. Or if you're in Matthew's gospel, if y'all were in my Matthew study, the so-called Sermon on the Mount, which St. Augustine called that, Matthew 5-7, they frame it together on purpose. But the passion narrative seems to force us to be chronologically consistent, basically of this, then sequential. This, then this, then this, and this. And that's what happened. And Mark 14 is where we start. Any questions or comments about anything so far? Anything?
I forgot something. I wrote down a word and I don't know what it means. And I spelled it Targums.
Oh, Targum. Targum. That's all right. You remember the person remember I said in the time period, most Jews could not speak or read Hebrew.
Yeah.
And when they read from the Hebrew text, their sacred text that kept in Hebrew, so they say the first 5 books of the Bible, someone on stage, or if there's near a stage, translated into Aramaic. Mm-hmm. That person was called a metergamon. That person would translate into Aramaic to the crowd. Those Aramaic translations could be quite loosey-goosey, because they might add in a little bit of interpretation as they translated. Uh-huh. But what happened was, it happened so much. You think about this, we would say Sunday, but it was their Sabbath, their Saturday, Friday and Saturday. It happened so much that it became common to translate certain passages certain ways. Because other people could speak. How'd you do that? Oh yeah, we usually hear it translated this way. It became stylized. Those Aramaic translations of the Hebrew portions of the Bible got composed. They got written down. We call that codified, put into a book. Those are called the Targums. Okay. So a Targum is an Aramaic loose translation of the Hebrew text. Of the ones that were read. That's right. And they're very insightful because they come about around the same time period of Jesus' life. So in the 1st century, many of them do. And that's invaluable because it lets us know how people other Jews in the time period were both translating and interpreting certain biblical passages. So you're going to say, what were other Jews thinking about Isaiah around the 1st century? You'd go to a Targum. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean everyone thought of it that way, but that's one of the places you could go. So it ended up kind of being like a commentary. And that's kind of the earliest kind of commentary. That's a Targum. T-A-R-G-U. So it's T-A-R-G-U-M. Targum, like you chew your gum.
I kept looking at that and I thought, well, did I make that up?
That's
right. Actually talked about
Just
Targum.
daydreaming in the study. Tarjam. Yeah, no good. No good. Good
I
question.
heard of Tar Heels, but not Tar.
That's right. That's right. Similar to Tar Heels. Some of this, probably a lot of this, will be quite familiar to you. So I won't go over every little bit, maybe as usual, but I will try to highlight some insights worth, I think, reflecting on. Mark says in verse 1, it was now 2 days before, literally, Pascha. Pascha. If you've ever seen this translated into English letters, it's P-A-S...
CHA.
Yeah, C-H-A. What did I say? P-A-S-C-H-A. It looks like Pascha. We say Pascha. It's actually, literally, it's Greek. So P-A-S-C-H... What did I say? C-H-A-H-A is a transliteration. That's with the Greeks. And now, if you say it through another different way, eventually through English, it's Passover. Passover. If you're talking to a Jew in the first century, or even now in Greek, you'd say it's Pascha. Sometimes you probably know this word, Paschal Lamb, or in churchese. Sometimes he was our Paschal Lamb. That's where Paschal is the adjective of Pascha. Pascha. So that means it's the Greek way of saying the the Jewish festival of what we call Passover. And Pesach is what they called it in Hebrew. Pesach, the Greeks said, we don't say Pesach, we say Pascha, and then it came through Paschal. Anyway, that's what, I'm just giving you some of those little tidbits if you hear those terms. So we can say Passover is fine. Sometimes I might throw in Pesach just accidentally because that's the Hebrew way of saying it. It's a habit. We read it that way in scholarship. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were within 2 weeks of each other. They're very close festivals. The Passover, you remember the Passover, just to remind us, it's in Exodus where the final plague or punishment by God to show his power over the Egyptian gods is to kill the firstborn sons, which everyone always gets wrong. They think they're a bunch of babies. That the firstborn sons would have been the eldest boys in the family. That would have decimated the Egyptian army, not the cribs. So, but you always see it in movies, a bunch of babies are dying. I mean, it's possible, but that's not the key. These would have almost certainly been teenager or adult males that die, not little babies. And if they would take the lamb and put the blood over the top of the door, the angel of death would pass over them, and that's where it comes from. So they're not just celebrating lambs being killed. They're celebrating, of course, this was the last thing right before what happened. The Exodus, and that's the formative event of the Jewish people. There weren't just Jews in Egypt who were set free. They came there from different boats and different lands, but they left as one people group. And the Exodus was a people-forming event, a circumstance. So that's why this event is so powerful. And it was celebrated every single year, still is celebrated every single year. The Pesach, the day they were killed, is in Nisan 14. Nisan is a day the Jews don't have their months like we do. January, February, March, April, and so forth. They name their months differently based on the lunar calendar. And their month called Nisan, like Nissan, the car, but it's N-I-S-A-N. There's only one S. Nisan is roughly, since it's lunar, it changes. It's not set all the time. But it's roughly our mid-March to mid-April, roughly. So it's a spring festival. And it's always on Nisan the 14th. But since our solar calendar changes, it means that the date changes for us because it moves on and off the calendar. Is it April? Is it March? April. And that's why, if you realized, you have Resurrection Sunday, and then the day of the triumphal entry, and even Lent, it changes every single year. That's because it's based off of a lunar moving calendar. Anyway, so Passover, huge feast, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. A lot of people will come into Jerusalem and stay there for about 2 weeks to finish all the festivals. And several 100,000 people would have been in Jerusalem. The chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth. Remember, this is now it's a kind of an open secret in Mark's gospel that they're trying to have him killed. But they want to come by stealth, and they want to, literally it says, and kill him. We learn from the gospels that it doesn't mean they really try to kill him, but rather, of course, have him killed. That's how it will happen. But they're seeking to arrest him by stealth. For they said, not during the feast, that there be basically a tumult of a foment, the crowd turning into a mob against us. They knew how to work the crowds. But they did want to get rid of them. And while he was at, pause there. Remember what happened most recently that reminds us why they hate him so much. I use the word hate, but why do they want to get rid of him? Most recently, what happened in Mark chapter 11? You remember? And in Mark 12, but particularly Mark 11, he comes in. It was called the triumphal entry in Jerusalem. And the first thing he does when he gets to the temple is do what? Overturns, right? And he condemns them. This is supposed to be a house of a prayer for all nations, but you've turned to a den of thieves or bandits. And then, of course, the fig tree, and they get it. They're ticked off. Like, who does this guy think he is? And then in Mark chapter 12, remember how all these teachings where people kept trying to test him. And he would give more Pebble as an example as, y'all don't know junk. Y'all don't know, I'm paraphrasing, but y'all don't. So he has not made good friends with these religious elite here in the Jerusalem area, and they want to get rid of him. While he was at Bethany, that's right outside of the area. You might go back out there to sleep at night and come back in Jerusalem that day. They go right outside of Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. Now, it doesn't say, your translation should not say Simon who was a leper, who formerly was a leper. The one who is formerly known as, like Prince or something. You know who Prince is? Maybe not. He's dead now, but he changed his name from Prince to a symbol. And they always said, the artist formerly known as Prince. Thought, good heavens, just call him Prince, man. Simon is not the leper. Mark does not want us to think this is Simon who's been healed, because that's not the point right now. So we actually don't know in the text, this Simon, this one, has not been healed. Simeon, I think, if I recall, is the most common male Jewish name of the time period. Well, I think Judas or Judas. I think this might have been second, but it's in the top three. He's a leper. Now, people who are lepers didn't go straight to hell, but if you're a Jew, you don't want to get near lepers. Any kind of skin disease. The translation at this time, we use the translation leprosy, but the word in Greek actually can mean a whole wide range of skin ailments. It doesn't necessarily mean that particular skin ailment. But the bottom line is, it is a skin ailment that can be seen, which renders you ritually impure, which means you can't have these skin diseases walk straight up to the temple, offer sacrifice to God, and go home. You have to be cleansed first. There has to be whenever you have ritual impurity, it says, imagine yourself being contaminated by like radioactivity or something, and you have a time period where you've got to be, or I remember it makes you think of the astronauts. When they come down, they don't just go straight home, right? They have to come back and get scrubbed and decontaminated for a while to see if there's any problems. That's what people thought about purity is what we call ritual impurities. And so it doesn't mean they've sinned. It does mean they don't have equal access to God. But if I come near you and I've got the skin disease like radioactivity, it might rub off on you. And so lepers, we have some indication later on that they really had to scream out, unclean, unclean. Because Jews would be ticked off of them if they're walking through the crowd shopping for some fish fry, and they rub up a dude who's got leprosy, and they find out later on, well, now, just like that, they've been rendered unclean. Dadgummit, now I can't go to the temple. It's going to take me 7 days or 3 days, depends on if you're a woman or a man and all that kind of stuff. And that's all in Leviticus, particularly, of all these rules. So Jesus is in the house of a leper. And I say remind you because that's a big deal. If you're of the Pharisaic group that are convinced that to be a faithful Jew, you cannot be associated with people who are in a state of impurity. The goal of life is to live in such a way that you're always pure enough to have immediate access to the temple. You don't eat, you don't hang out with Gentiles, ritually impure Jewish people. You don't want to hang out with them. Don't even be seen or associated with them. And remember, in the gospel, we'll see in a second some more examples of that. He's with a leper. And he sat at table. That's a fellowship thing. I mean, this guy, Jesus is hanging out with him. This ain't just, oh, sorry, Simon, got to go, man, you're unclean. He's hanging out. We've seen the woman who had blood. Remember that? She'd been a doctor for all those, 14 years? And when he touches people, he's not rendered unclean. They're rendered clean. So his effect is to purify them. He doesn't get defiled himself. This woman came in with an alabaster flask of ointment of it says, usually say nard.
Yes.
Yeah, pure nardos, muro and nardo. This woman, it probably means she's not at a meal. Someone from the outside comes and they hear that Jesus is there at the house. You must imagine, unlike this house, I mean there were doors, but they had some doors there, but doors were open, windows were open. There's not a lot of privacy in the ancient world, and not to mention if there was a famous guy. Imagine if a famous politician or someone was here, or a movie actor, a word might spread through your neighbors. Well, that's exactly what's happened here. This woman walks in, she sees Jesus, and she takes whatever the stuff, it probably is a perfumed oil. It's probably what it is. A lot of times, if your translation says nard, that's straight from the Greek naudos. That's the Greek word. It's a way of saying, we're not going to translate that. We're not exactly sure what it is, but it probably is a kind of oil that has a perfume to it. And Mark lets us know it's very costly, right? It's very expensive. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. It probably, now, we could imagine she brings in a jar. It could also represent, amongst a Gentile community, they would have probably heard it this way. We know this was common based on paintings from reliefs and statues and wall frescoes from the ancient world, that wealthy women would have these things around her neck. Whenever she needed it, she might be able to open up things. But to break a whole thing on the whole deal, which means she's getting rid of a lot of money. Well, it's not weird that she put this perfumed oil, you might call it, we might say cologne, but it's more like perfume, on him and on his head, because in the ancient world, in the Greek society, that was common at a person's home during a dinner, especially right after the dinner, before you went to the post-dinner drinks, or what's called a symposium, which a lot of the dudes would go out by themselves and have a little party. They'd bring in some women dancers and singers and just have a good old time, and maybe someone would speak oratory skills, and it was party. Well, in between, typically between the dinner and that, they would, in fact, ask either the courtesans, the women who were there to be friendly to the men, who were usually there the whole time. They were hired to come and do that. They would get them all ready and prettied up, wash their feet, or someone else would do it. The fact that she walks in and puts oil over his head is not weird. What's weird, of course, is he's at Simon the leper's house. That's weird. I mean, that's weird. The second that's weird is she kind of comes off the street and does this. So it doesn't. So she is breaking some social barrier things in that she's walking right to a leper's house, and she walks right to a Jewish teacher and so forth. But it's not like what she's doing is sinful or something. But this is a bold move. But there were some who said to themselves, and your translation might say indignantly, that's fine. They were kind of ticked off. Why in the world did she waste all this? Why did she waste this? Quite frankly, I would have asked the exact same question. No! Remember, it wasn't long ago when Jesus told a rich man in Mark chapter 10, you got one last thing, go do what? Sell, and give to the poor. Now, that's not Jesus' only attitude towards stuff, but it was to that in Mark 10. You would think the disciples would pick up the hint. They're not good at picking up hints in the gospel, quite frankly. But if I give them a break for a second, you would think, oh, they got it right. Because usually they don't get it. Like, you're not like the Gentiles. You don't lord it over there. Okay, I got a question for you. I want to see your right hand, your left hand. We want to be in power. They're dim-witted. Here they seem to get it right. Why she wasted this? That ointment might have been more 300 denarii and given to the poor. That's a lot.
Here is more than a year's wages.
That's right. A denarius is, at the time period, most scholars concur, was roughly 1 day's wages. Josephus, I think it's Josephus, the Jewish historian, who says that. So from more than 300, it's fair to say, yeah, roughly a year's wages, right? And I'm sure that's the disciples' point. Like, dude, that's a year's salary you just dumped on his head. What is wrong with you? You know how many poor people you could have helped with that? And they fuss at her. And Jesus says something. Man, this is pure Jesus here. Like, he doesn't do what I think. He says, leave her alone. Why are you troubling her? What she's done is beautiful or wonderful. She's done a wonderful thing for me. You will always have the poor with you. You will always have them. And whenever you will, you can do good to them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burying. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. That's striking on a few levels. One is, this is a minor character. This is safe to say this is a minor character in the Gospel of Mark. This random woman who walks up and busts this alabaster, this jar, and anoints Jesus' head. But yet he says something phenomenal, that wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told. Well, to a degree that's true, because I got it written down in the gospel. We don't know who she is. She didn't even say a word. She's nameless. She's speechless. She's all that stuff. But yet what's remembered is not her, because that's not the point. What's remembered? What she's done. There you go. That's what he said. What she has done will be told in memory. And Jesus, of course, it seems to be the case. What Jesus is fussing at is not disciples. you're right. We should always, no matter what, always give to the poor. Jesus doesn't speak that way in the gospel, in his ministry. In his ministry, Jesus praises people for recognize, to use terms for a second, the eschatological moment, the end times moment. Like, you don't realize this is the time. Remember way back when, is it chapter 2, verse 19, when he said, is that the bride? Yep, that's right, 2:19. He said, why don't they fast? And Jesus says, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. So it's not that fasting all the time is bad. It's not right now is not the time for it. Now is not the time for my disciples to be in a spiritual state of sitting back, reflecting, and remorseful repentance. Now's the time for ministry, because they're with me now. We got to get at it. You got to recognize now's the time to do something different. And maybe a couple of examples throughout the gospel, but that's one that comes to mind. Here's another one. Yeah, helping the poor is a good thing, like fasting, sure. But helping the poor all the time, no matter what, is not. This woman has realized what she's doing. Now, she may not have realized it's right before his burial, right? But Jesus interprets that way. This woman had an incredible generous act. I mean, it is, no matter what your view of this woman is, whatever she is, whatever she's done, to come in and put this very precious, very valuable, she could have sold it herself. That could have been her retirement, you know what I'm saying? Any of that stuff. So what she's done is very generous. But Jesus is saying, of course, what he just said is, you're always going to have the poor, but you will not always have this moment. And he interprets it theologically to say, what she's done, this perfume acts like an anointing. If you remember, you might have heard this before, I'm sure, but when someone died, we see this explicitly in John's gospel, but when people die, they go, and Jews in any ancient culture had a very specific burial ritual that took some time. And we know for a fact the Jews, from a lot of reasons, that the Jews would anoint the body with oil. It's kind of like giving it a bath, quite frankly, the corpse a bath. And they put oil over it. They put different spices and things that smelled good because of what's about to happen. Wrap it up, kind of, not mummify it, but kind of, because I know it's going to take about a year. And Jesus, of course, never has that privilege. Now, in the narrative, if you're following chronologically, we don't know that. We don't know that's going to happen. Now, if we know the gospel story, yeah, of course we do. But if you remember, from their perspective, they don't. They have no clue. They have no clue that within 24 hours, he's going to be dead. They don't know that. They do not know this is about to have the Last Supper, as we call it. They don't know that.
That hurt?
Well,
She
Well-
broke it and poured it over it.
no, a good question. We don't know that she cracked it over his head. He poured it over his head. We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We don't. She did break the flask. So how she broke it,
Yeah, she broke the
That-
jar and poured the perfume.
that'd be kind of good comic stretch. Jesus, cotton like, hey. Oh, so there.
There were different types.
It could be. Yeah, they could sell it. Yeah, that's right.
There's all kinds of
That's right.
things that I
For me, when I think of this story, this narrative, I think this is the closest thing we have, it seems to me, in any of the Gospels to the gifts that the Magi bring in Matthew 3, that she brings her gift. So theirs is frankincense, gold, and myrrh. Hers is this perfume oil. So in that sense, I would say it's an act of worship, because biblically, worship means to demonstrate loyalty or devotion, and they manifest that in different ways. And one of the chapters in the book I'm writing that topic, so it's fresh in my mind. So I do think she's demonstrating some devotion and loyalty to Jesus by giving up something, and hers now is to give this. And she's preparing his body. I also appreciate in verse 7 this emphasis, you're going to have the poor with you. And of course, in the context, he's speaking to his disciples and followers there in the moment, which is, listen, you're going to have them. They're always going to be there. Just reminds me, yeah, you will. And I mean, that's almost 2,000 years ago. The answer, the response to that is, you're right. There's still people who need help. And you can do, as he said, you can do good to them. You can. And you can and you should. But helping the poor at all cost is not a good thing. This story is an example of that. Always doing whatever you can, nonstop helping the poor every second, all the time. No, there are times for the kingdom of God it is appropriate, not in that moment, not to do that, to make decisions that don't help them. And that's because they recognize in the moment Jesus, that devotion gets everything. And that fits everything that Jesus, I mean, it fits perfectly in the ministry of Jesus. They say, but my family, I've heard this many, and I've talked about this when we did Mark chapter 3. I've had people tell me through the years, your family, that's your first ministry. They're the number one ministry. They're the most important thing in your life. And I always, but if they have a conversation with me, I go, no, they're not at all. They're not the most top priority in my life. As a Christian, they're not. They're top familial priority I have. Sure, absolutely. Top familial. That is, of other humans, but that doesn't mean they're the number one priority in my life. David, I get that from Jesus. I mean, that Jesus said, who are my family, my brothers and sisters? Well, those who do the will of God. He never says, Jesus, he says this in Matthew, but we covered this when I covered Matthew. My dad died, let me go bury my dad. No. You let the dad bury the dead. You come follow me right now. Jesus apparently didn't call everyone to do the same thing, but apparently that guy needed to hear that challenge. My point is everything in life in priority level is inferior to whatever Jesus needs in the moment. That's it, all the time. And I can think of times, and I won't go down that route, but I can think of times, whether it be helping the orphans, helping the poor, helping my family. There are times in life where if I did what they wanted, and I only met their needs all the time, I actually wouldn't meet the needs of Jesus. I'd be so burned out, or whatever it might be, or their values of my family members, their values they have that I don't have, but they're family. Or I might give all my money away to the poor and not be able to take care of my own children. Well, that would be derelict. I mean, see, so making it a hard principle that every single time you have a need, you got to give. I don't find that convincing. Jesus tells us. But we're going to have the poor, and we can do good to them. And I think Jesus would say, and you should, like the Mark 10 man, the rich man, sell everything you have, and he didn't say give it to me. What did he say? And give it to the poor. So yes, rich people should do everything we can to help. But it's not a universal principle at all cost, is my point. And the gospel is preached. Verse 10, if we'll go ahead. Then Judas Iscariot, and that last name Iscariot, who was one of the 12, that last name is, of course, to distinguish him from all kinds of other Judas, since we get the word Jew from that, Jew from Judah or Judas. There are different interpretations of where Iscariot comes from, but I'm going to move on. He was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And that's just, Mark just kind of puts it out there all of a sudden. And when they heard it, they were glad, and they promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now, Matthew's gospel, we have a lot more details there, but Mark is getting on with the story. But it builds suspense, and you're supposed to see it that way. Now, all of a sudden, this inner circle, and that's why Mark says, was one of the 12. He's been a minor character in this whole story, but he's been with them. That means 12 means Jesus called him. He hand-selected this dude, and he's going to want to betray him. Now, what does that mean to betray him? Why did he go? Remember back in verse 1 and 2? Remember that? They were looking for a way to arrest him by stealth. Verse 12, and on that first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, the Paschal lamb, his disciples said to him, where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover, Pesach? And he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you, and follow him. Wherever he enters, say to the householder, the teacher says, where is my guest room? Where am I to eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready. There prepare for us. Now, what we've seen since all through it, but certainly in chapter 11 and moving forward, every time Jesus has his little prediction, it seems like a prediction, or at least, here's what's going to happen, dudes. It is always right every time. Go ahead of you, there's going to be a colt tied up, and say the master needs it. They find that. They go find the donkey. They have these, you might say, predictions. Like in Mark 13, I'm telling you, don't get freaked out. Remember this, y'all, in Mark 13, you were in here last time. He gives these predictions. Well, guess what happens? The disciples set out, verse 16. They found as it told them, they prepared to Passover. We're probably supposed to pick up, especially in the last part of the narrative of Mark's gospel, that when Jesus gives, here's what's going to happen, you're supposed to trust it's going to happen that way. Remember back in 8:31, 9:31, and 10:33 through 35, he said, I will go in, I will be handed over, I will be beaten and killed, and on the third day I'll rise again. So what we're seeing in the gospel now is we're starting to see more and more evidence that when Jesus says something's going to happen, it happens. You see that fig tree? I mean, on and on it goes. And that's what they find. Now, my own opinion is this is not a profound prophecy. This isn't some Holy Spirit moved thing where Jesus had a prayer and all of a sudden he woke up and had a vision. I see a room. I don't think so. The odds are very, very high historically. Jesus had already worked this out. We know, I said this last time or 3 weeks ago, that Jesus certainly was in Judea and Jerusalem more than what Mark says. Certainly it was, if you have the Gospel of John, which says he was there several times. Remember, one of his good friends was Lazarus. Lazarus lived in this area. Mary and Martha, they're from this area. So he had friends, acquaintances, other disciples who lived in this area. So it's highly likely this had just been arranged. And Jesus says, here's what's going to happen. But Mark uses it to let us know when Jesus says something's going to find it, you're going to find it. And when it was the evening, he came with the 12. With the 12 means the 2 are already ahead, probably, and the 12, that's at least 14. Remember, all through Mark's gospel, the 12 represent the symbolic 12 nations of Israel. He's reconstituting God's people. But there are more disciples than 12. You should always remember that, unless it says, he'll do it in a little bit, he takes Peter, James, and John, Andrew aside. But otherwise, in my own personal mind, I'm always picturing at least 15, at least, because you got women with him everywhere he goes. At least 3. You got Mary, another Mary, and a bunch of Marys. And so, yeah, and not to and also depend what region is in, region of the area. So he's got 15 to 20 people with him most of the time. Anyway, there's the 12 they're supposed to have had leadership roles. So while they were eating at the table, Jesus says, he starts out, I truly tell you the truth. I'm telling you the truth. I say to you, one of you here will betray me, one who's eating with me. In the Mediterranean culture, that's one of the greatest breaches of trust. It's a huge breach of trust to invite someone to have a meal with them, and that's what this emphasis, the one who is eating with me. It's hard to overemphasize that. Today, it might not be as big a deal, but it kind of is if you think about it. I've been betrayed several times in my life, and I can think back to those times with people who did it, and I go, I had you in my home. Have you ever heard that before? I've had you in my home. We had my dinner table. We made food for you. Like, there's a sense of, and I'm not a Mediterranean person for the first century. I'm just a white American, and I still understand that a little bit. Like, what? There's like a sanctity of hanging out with a person and being with them, and it's much more so for this culture. So it's a really big deal. Now, in verse 19, they began to be, lupisti can be sorrowful. You can say sorrowful and say that, but it's more like they're kind of sad, frustrated. Your translation might say, is it I?
It says grieved.
Grieved. Okay, grieved is good, fine. Mm-hmm. At the end of verse 19, what does it say? Is it I?
Surely not I.
Surely not I. What translation is that?
American Standard.
American Standard. Anybody else?
Surely you don't mean me.
Surely don't mean me. What do you got, Morna?
I am not the one, am I?
Am I the one I? The translations that are better are the ones that make us do a declarative statement. That is, I'm not the one. The questions are more wrong. Because in Greek, it's not so, they're not very frustrated. They're not sad and anguished and go like, am I the one? And you always see that in church plays, but that's not, it should be, no, I'm not. I don't know what you're smoking, Jesus. I'm not the guy. And they're frustrated, sad, like, no, I'm not. They began to be sorrowful. So, and he said to them, and you can just imagine the kind of around the tables going, you're like, no, I'm not telling you, I can, you maybe you, but I'm, I'm not going to do it. There's like a little tumult picks up a little bit. And he says, it's one of the 12, one who's dipping bread into the dish with me. Now, it probably doesn't mean literally in the moment I'm handing the bread to Vanna and she's dipping it, but rather I'm telling you someone at this table is probably how we're supposed to read that. I'm telling you someone at this table is going to do it. That had to have been very, very, very shocking of all the stuff they've seen and been through. For the Son of Man, there it is, Jesus' way of talking about himself, again, from Daniel 7, 13 and 14. It goes, as it is written of him. And now, that is a very common way in the Gospels, as it is written. It means something along the lines of, as God the Father wants. It's God the Father's will. And it is written, meaning it's his will written in the text. Now, what are they talking about in the text? Probably a very common text that they go through for the suffering Jesus is Isaiah 53. Right, this suffering servant who goes. So that suffering servant is supposed to suffer. And that's, now, he doesn't quote a Bible verse. He doesn't even allude to it, but virtually everyone agrees. That's probably what Jesus has in the back of his mind. The Son of Man's from Daniel, but as it is written, probably comes from Isaiah. Because the Son of Man in Daniel does not suffer. He reigns victorious as kingdom. But that's what Jesus is. He's just twisting metaphor, man. It's hard to catch up because he's deliberately saying, I am that victorious king who rules over like Daniel 7. I'm also that king who suffers, like in Isaiah 52, 53. I'm that person. And it says that's what's going to happen to me, what God wants to that. But woe, whenever a prophet in the Old Testament said woe, you don't want to hear the word woe. And if my children, and I need to do this more often, if my children are in trouble and I go, woe to you, I need to do that. Because that means hell is about to be unleashed, grounded, locked down. But in prophets said that, you read back in your Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Hosea, they always say, particularly Jeremiah, woe to you, woe to you. Remember in Matthew chapter 11, he says, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, woe to you. When prophets did that, it's a bad news of judgment. That's exactly what it means. And remember, Jesus, one of his roles is that of a prophet. Woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been better for that man if he had not been born. And so it seems to, some people make this a big struggle of free will, not free will. Personally, I do not. I think Jesus is saying, verse 21, the Son of Man is going to do exactly what the Son of Man is supposed to do. I'm going to fulfill what God wants me to do. Yep. But woe to the person who betrays me. That is to say, the person who chooses his own free will to betray me, that's horrible for you. It's better if you've never been born. That's bad. God the Father will make sure that his will is accomplished, even though you will betray me. And some read a lot more into that and say, no, God must have caused him to betray him, and God, I don't think he did. I think it's a way of saying God can use any, sisters and brothers, man, I've said it, it's worth saying again. God can work around anybody's evil choice. Anybody's. No matter what he or she or they have done to you, he can work around any of them. God doesn't go, oh man, now I'm stumped. Boy, that was a tough one. I had no idea. It just can. Push, pull, shove, they do whatever they want to us. God can work around it, and that's what he did through the death of Jesus. Any questions or comments about that section so far? It makes you want, did it for money. They promised to give him money.
Yeah. I mean, you figure he knew he was going to get something out of it, or why?
Right. Yeah. And Matthew, I think and Luke as well, they emphasize more of the silver and emphasize the mercenary nature of it. And I don't doubt that's a strong possibility. Personally, I've always found it pretty convincing, at least to myself, and maybe some other scholars too, and maybe all, maybe not. I wonder if I time traveled. I wonder if Judas really did think his handing him over to a degree would have caused Jesus to initiate this final battle of the end of ages. It's like he's... I recently watched The Karate Kid again, and it's like saying, if they know Ralph Macchio is going to win and they shove him into a fight, they know you're going to... If they didn't have the movement, if they just pushed him in there like, you're going to take him down, I don't want to do it, and he shoves him, but he shoves him, and Ralph Macchio ends up getting killed or hurt. And like, why'd you do that? Why? I just surely knew that he was going to beat the good guy, just the bad guy over there. I wonder about that sometime. And for one is, I think that would fit to some degree this tenor of the disciples so far, like as they're going to Jerusalem, Jesus, not Judas, but the other one, let us sit at your right hand of authority and power. And the other disciples get ticked off at them, probably in the assumption that, no, we want to be, but don't get ahead of me. So it seems to be the general tenor of the disciples that they're going and boom, baby. Mark 11, triumphal entry. People are cheering. They had to have had the hopes pretty high that this is it, man. Whatever he overturns the money chain, whatever he's about to do, it's going to be big. And on top of that, another thing is, I don't think it's in Mark's gospel, but it is, I believe, in Matthew's gospel. When Judas eventually kills himself, before he commits suicide, he says, a lot of times translations say, and he repented. But that's not, the Greek word there is a different word. Of all the words they could have used, it's a different kind of word. And that's why a lot of scholars pick up on it and say he might have felt remorse, but not guilt like repentance. And so does that mean, did they change that word on purpose to make he really was a scoundrel? Or is it just stylistic? Or does it demonstrate he really thought he didn't do anything wrong, but now he feels awful that he died, like he pushed him in the wrong fight? I don't know. Maybe that's not even where they shouldn't have said it, but I've always wondered if that's more likely. But Matthew particularly really emphasizes he was a mercenary. He wanted to get paid. But of course, he throws the money back. He didn't want it. Judas seems to be, he either was a wimp who wimped out. Like when he saw what really happened, like, I thought it was cool to betray him and I wanted the money, but now I feel so guilty. Or that is an option. And that's the standard, typical way it's always presented. And the other option is he didn't think it was going to end up that way. And so now he genuinely feels remorse because he didn't think the outcome was going to happen like that.
Force Jesus' hand.
That's, yes.
Do you have any idea what motivation he might have had, Judas, to betray Jesus?
The Gospels give him no mercy. In fact, if you think John's Gospel is written last, if you put them in typical chronological Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, they get progressively worse. By the time it gets to John, it says Satan had filled his heart. He's nothing but driven by Satan. He starts out as mercenary, which is bad enough. He wants money. And he gets to where it's just almost like Satan in the flesh. And then becomes that. In every portrait, Judas gets painted for centuries. Judas is painted in medieval portraits as the little devil, which leads to the idea that Jews are devils because the word Jew comes from Judas. And so he'll be at that Last Supper, and they see all the disciples, and Judas has little horns coming out. It doesn't help that in German it's Judah for Jew, just like Judas. It's the same word. They'll say, yeah, they're all the same. They're all hungry for money, and they're all going to betray you. And it leads to this horribly stupid racist thing, but that's where it comes from.
Wow.
That's where it comes from. So the Gospels would say, basically, what's his motivation? They would say at least, or at all, would be money. The other motivation would be is that it's evil's way to defeat Jesus. And I'm really not denying what the Gospels say at all. All I'm saying is, but at the same time, it doesn't tell us that much more. And I'm wondering if we interviewed him, I wonder if he'd say I just wonder. I don't have hard evidence. I just wonder if he'd say yeah, I did it. Yes, I felt remorse. I thought that dude was going to go in there and beat their tails. I thought the disciples were going to be establishing the new kingdom. I don't know. Because he's not happy afterwards. He doesn't betray him and go to a party. And they go, well, then why you feel remorseful? You wanted him to betray him. That's why the party lends it. Well, maybe he didn't think that was going to happen. Maybe. Anyway, at this point, Jesus is not saying very nice things about this Judas character. But he knows who it is. He knows who it is. Now think about this for a second, because in Mark's gospel, he does not get up and leave. The other gospels, he gets up and leaves when he's been called out. Not in Mark's gospel. In Mark's gospel, he keeps having Passover meal with him. So he keeps breaking bread and drinking wine and having these fellowship things with the other disciples. And as they were eating, he took bread and blessed. And this is almost identical to when he broke bread earlier to give to the crowds, except he didn't thank God. This one, he blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And he said, "Take, this is my body." This is my body. There's a massive historical long debate that key thinkers in the Christian tradition have had over that exact phrase. And the Latin word hoc est corpus is this is body. Hocus is oftentimes sketched into, is that the right word? Etched into tables at Roman Catholic churches. It'll say hocus. And Roman Catholics believe, for various reasons, but they believe that the reason why you have Mass, or Missa in Latin, is you are re-sacrificing Jesus' body over and over. And that's why for centuries, well, it still is true that the main reason you go to Mass, they call it go to Mass, is for Mass. It's not for worship. It's not for preaching. It's not. In fact, their preaching usually is very bad. I'm not being mean, but they're not trained on how to preach or teach the Bible, because that's not the point. And for centuries, unlike today, though, for centuries, you might have seen some songs and prayers that were all rehearsed and staged, written, but you watched the priest around the table at a distance. They would stand around it. They're back towards you, and you see them every once in a while speak Latin. They would hold up the bread and bless it, and they would drink the wine. You just watched them. That's for centuries in the church. But Vatican II really changed a lot of that. And then in the 1960s, And they just changed a lot of it. They stopped talking Latin all the time, so English speakers and German speakers and Spanish speakers could understand what they were saying, unless you're educated in Latin. A lot of things changed. But anyway, people used to make fun of it as a loose thing. They'd say, "Oh, this is my body." They say Roman Catholics said, "No, when I bless this bread, it becomes the body of Christ." Now, most sophisticated Roman Catholics would say it's not literally becoming the flesh of Jesus. Sometimes you'll hear Roman Catholic apologists say they've taken it to laboratories and tested and it has DNA. That most Roman specialists, most Roman Catholic specialists will say, no, you misunderstand. That it is the body in a deeper philosophical sense. We call this ontological sense, and that's borrowed all back to Aristotle. That it is it on a deeper ontological essence level, not that it turns into a piece of skin that you eat. Anyway, that when they say that's how they say it has to be that because it says this is my body and it has to be re-sacrificed over and over and over. That's why you got to go to Mass. You're there to witness the re-sacrifice of Jesus over and over and over again. Well, people make fun of that because of Latin. Not everyone knows Latin. They would say hocus corpus. What does that sound like if you say it fast? Hocus pocus. So they would say hocus pocus. It's just magic. Poof! It turns the body of Jesus. And the Protestant reformers in the 15th, 16th centuries, they really attacked that a lot and said, no, it's not the actual body of Jesus. It's not, you're not re-sacrificing. It represents the body of Jesus. There was one big great debate with two guys, and one guy took out a knife and he etched hoc est corpus in the table. Like, that's what it says. Well, to my Roman Catholic brothers and sisters, I say it is what it says. But you've got to be dead wrong if you think Jesus means that when he broke off a piece of bread at the Passover meal and passed it around in front of their eyeballs and said, by the way, you're eating my arm. You're eating my fingers. If that's what you really think he meant, I think you're crazy. They're crazy. There's no conceivable way a disciple of Jesus, a Jewish first century disciple of Jesus, when they heard this is my body, would have for 1 second thought it meant Jesus just passed around his arm. They saw him take the bread and break it. So it's inconceivable to me that they'd say, oh, in a philosophical, ontological sense, it becomes. I don't think any of them have any concept of that at all. Instead, I think the most natural understanding is this represents my body. Now, the idea that they had to ingest his body is still weird. Jews don't talk that way. In John chapter 6, Jesus teaches the disciples some of this stuff, and he says, in fact, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, you cannot be my disciple. So either he said that on more than one occasion, or that's John's way of interpreting these kind of passages. And it says, basically, I'm paraphrasing, they were disgusted and left. They said, these teaching too hard. Several of his disciples abandoned Jesus after that. Jesus, you sound like you're cannibals. In the early church, by the way, if you don't know this, in the turn of the 1st and 2nd century, it was a very common charge for non-Christians to charge Christians of cannibalism. When they wrote to the local magistrates and the emperor, they would say they're cannibals. And they're incestuous. They call each other brother and sister, and they give each other kisses. They do. That was a common charge. And cannibalism was one of them, because they eat this guy's flesh. It's very unlikely they would have made that up. So this, every scholar agrees, this has to go back to Jesus. No Jew would have made this up. They make up anything else besides this one. But what's amazing, of course, is this is not the Passover. And I've been to all kinds of Seder meals where you go and reenact the Exodus today when Jews have Seder meals. I'm not fully against them. What I am against, for biblical reasons, is saying that Christians really, really ought to go to Seder meals to understand what Jesus was doing. I disagree completely. Nothing in the story is about the Passover meal as it relates to the Exodus. None of it is. Jesus is deliberately taking elements that represented the bread and the wine, as it represented leading Exodus, but he is reinterpreting it. This bread does not represent non-leavened bread leaving as Israelite slaves. When you ingest this bread, you are participating in me, which will, of course, eventually be my death. When you drink this, you're participating with me. Me. That is, this is not about an event that happened thousands of years ago. This is an event about me now. But it's laden with this deep Exodus background. Sure, absolutely. But this is not about all the cloves and the salt and the bitter and all the stuff. It's not. It's about Jesus. So this meal is about Jesus. No doubt about it. This is my body. Then he took a cup. Now, which cup of all the Passover meal, we don't know. And people always tell you exactly which one it was. I don't know how they know that. They do. They'll say that it had to have been the so-and-so cup because there's different. He doesn't say that. And that's Mark's point is this is not Passover. Mark has gone out of his way to strip this thing of, of all the explicit allusions to it, except the bread and the cup. And he had given thanks. He gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Now, for many is a way of saying hiparpolon. It's like saying, I remember Mark 10:45, the Son of Man did not come to, what, be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. It's just hyperbole. A whole lot of people, whoever put their faith in him, kind of stuff. Same thing here. Truly I say to you, I shall not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. So to take the body, to take the blood, is to be connected with Jesus. And this exact thing in verse 24, this is my blood of the covenant. And sometimes translations put of the new covenant. Is that what your translation says? The new agreement. It's really just covenant. And the reason why is in verse 24, and that's nothing in the world if they have new. I don't get bogged down with that, but it is new in the sense that he's forming a new one, right? A covenant is, people get worked up, it's not a contract, it's bigger than that. Well, it is a contract. A covenant is a contract. There's different kinds of contracts, but in essence, this is a covenant contract where a person is certainly going into a relationship with a person, but there are usually stipulations on one and the other. Now, not every single covenant or contract is identical, that's for sure, but they have major categories. And this idea is, one of the stipulations is, if you eat this bread and drink this juice, you are concurring. You are joining into a covenant relationship with me based on my body and blood being poured out for you. Say it this way. If you participate in this meal, you are participating in my death. You're going all in. Now, this blood of the covenant is almost certainly a reference back. Now, there's back in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 11, and Exodus 24:8. This idea is that the blood of the covenant, and these references, Zechariah 9:11 and Exodus 24:8, is blood that of the. It said the exact expression is when they would take the blood of these animals and splatter it on the altar and the people. It marks the people as God's covenant people. That sounds kind of gross to me, but you go into a butcher shop and say, "Hey man, come here, dude," and they get a paintbrush and start spraying it with blood on it. But imagine for a second, instead of that, I join the Navy, and we all get a tattoo the day we all enroll. Well, you just got marked. You got marked, and you did it together on purpose, and you got inked up. That's almost certainly exactly what they thought, the same thing. The difference is the blood being poured onto them, that tattoo, as it were. Not literally. I mean, blood, you get the analogy? Blood doesn't stay there forever. But the point is they're getting ink marked on them, there's blood marked on them. They thought the blood purified you. It demonstrated a sense of holiness on you. But the point of my tattoo analogy is you do it on purpose to mark that you've been marked. If someone in the ancient world, they had religious tattoos commonly, they might put the word Zeus or something on their arm, or their favorite god. Like, that's my god. That's my babe, my boo. Sometimes people, it's real cool in Christian circles now to get the tetragrammaton. Yahweh, the 4 letters, YHWH, God's name. I have a good buddy who's got Yahweh huge around his forearm. They religious tattoo. My point is he's been marked, right? That's the idea. That's what Jesus is saying here. This blood of the covenant is my blood poured out, but if you drink it, what it represents, you're being marked as my people. You're being marked as my people. My people, in that sense, Exodus, you will be exiled. You exodus out. But that's the closest the analogy gets. Everything else is not all about the Exodus, but it does mean Jesus saying, to this day, the early church still thought that. We see in Paul that one of the earliest, I think it is the earliest saying of Jesus is 1 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 7, where Paul quotes from this exact event. And so they use this as a very sacred time. Paul even says, aren't some of you sick? And some people might even died. And that's because when they were going to have their, what we call communion and whatnot, they called it all kinds of things, communion, Last Supper, Last Dinner, whatever. When they had that, they thought it was a very sacred event and ceremony So much that Paul said that some of you at the Corinthians are getting sick and horrible because you're mistreating it. They were using it as a time to demonstrate who the haves and have-nots. People who don't work, they're rich, so they have plenty of time to eat during the day and drink the wine. The poor people who got off of work come home, come to the church building, come to the church house. There's nothing left, and they were showing partiality, all kinds of stuff. And he was saying that is bad. Stop doing it. Take it seriously. It's a very, very old concept, and I've said many times in sermons and in Bible studies, I think it should still be that when we take the bread and we take the juice, this is a standard. You can go to the Greek Orthodox Church, Roman Catholic Church, and Protestant churches. They all concur. Communion is a massive part of what we do. Protestants don't take as I've made implicitly clear, Protestants don't put near as much weight on top of this communion meal. You get probably one of the most farthest extremes away from Roman Catholics you can get are Baptist. I know them the best because I grew up as one and went to Baptist schools, and they went for a long time, and many still will say it's not even a symbol. They would say maybe symbol. It's something you do just to remember him by. And so in many, many, many Baptist churches and Protestants, they'll have a table. It's not etched hoc est corpus. It's do this in remembrance of me, which of course he says later, and Paul explicitly says that, do this in remembrance of me. So it's just a remembrance, just a remembrance. So that's one of the other extreme is we're only doing it just because you said to. It's a commandment, or do remember me, period. The other far extreme is you are re-sacrificing the body of Jesus. My own view is, I don't know if it's in the middle, but my own view is it's certainly not re-sacrificing the death of Jesus. Has been killed already. That happened a long time ago. My sins are forgiven. I'm not re-sacrificing his body. I don't need a priest to break over it for me and pray. I don't need any of that. But it has to be more than just something we do to, that's a good memory. We are participating in the death of Jesus every single time we do it. I don't think it's magical. I don't think the bread transforms to something. I do think breaking bread together as Christians in a spirit of prayer, and this attitude of worship we have, we drink it, and as I do it, it is an act of worship. And I'll say this quickly and move on. Y'all can talk about what you want to. I think I've told you before, but I remember the first time I ever gave communion. I wish I wrote it down the date because it'd be cool to remember that day. I was working in a Methodist church, and I remember I was on the left side, so stage left. And that church had kneelers, and so everyone came down during the service and knelt the left and right side, like a dozen to 15 at a time, and you would give bread and juice, and they would get up and go back the next row, which I prefer. I like that a lot. I think I think making worship physical is always a good thing, if you can do it. I understand that if you can do it. And I remember when it was my turn, I knew it. I was what? I don't know, I must have been 19, 20 years old. And but anyway, the guy explained, the senior pastor explained to our associate how to do it. I'm ready for it, no problem. I was in the right frame of mind. I was praying, no big deal. And I go up there to get the bread, and as soon as I start to do it, I start crying. This overwhelming, not like get the tissue, but I had to stop back, tears welled up. And as soon as I had to say the words, the body of Christ, which is broken for you. And this overwhelming sense of, I should not be doing this. The sense of, I'm not worthy for this. I need to be kneeling beside you. I should not be handing out this bread. The sense of, and I know it's just bread, but in the moment, for me, and I never went away in my ministry. I don't cry every time, but it really was I'm so glad either God or something did it in me that said, don't ever forget this. Don't ever forget this. And I'm telling you, I never did. I vividly remember the feeling. And it took me about 8 people into it before me to make sure I could keep doing it. Because I was so choked up. I mean, I know all the theology. I know I can do it. I've been saved by grace. But just being able to break the bread and say the body of Christ broken for you was overwhelming to me. And that's not a story about how awesome I am. It was unworthy I am, and I'm saying that's. I think that gets more out of the sense of participation. I'm gonna move on pretty quickly. If that's okay. I'm sorry. Anything else about that you want to talk about? Feel free to. No.
Well, I think in reference to what you said earlier about the 12 didn't know the future, so I'm wondering when we read that last part that he was saying that he wouldn't drink of the wine again until he was in heaven, essentially.
Yeah, I was about to read that part. Good. That's right. They didn't know. So to wrap up one more time, Jesus is saying, if you participate in this bread, this juice right now, today, you are forming a covenant. You are participating with me. like the Jews of old who got splattered with blood and bread, to demonstrate they are gods. They've been marked for God. You are being marked for me if you participate. Don't eat and do not drink lightly. Truly I say to you, I shall not drink again of the fruit of the vine, of course that means wine, until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. So Jesus is not looking back on the Exodus, he's looking to the future. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. Now, how bizarre that must have seemed to them, quite frankly, if you imagine for a second. You're not going to drink wine again? No, Jesus. No, you don't understand how this works. We have a kingdom established. We've been in Jerusalem. It's time to make sure this goes down. He's saying, I'm about to die. I'm about to die. And that goes back to Isaiah. If you don't know that, Isaiah promises, and this standard Judaism of the time period and literature, that Jews, a common imagery for the world to come is a banquet, a heavenly banquet, and it comes from Isaiah. But that God will give us, all the peoples that come will be invited to this large banquet. And if you take that literally, okay, or metaphorically, it's a feast. Everybody likes feast, and they did too back in the world. But he's saying, next time I'm going to drink that wine is in the heavenly banquet. That's his point. And they had sung a hymn, which is pretty standard. They went out to the Mount of Olives. Historically speaking, like today, you'd been pretty tipsy. There's a lot of wine drinking at the Passover meal. Kids too. And there's probably no children here, but so all that to say, these guys, it's late, they're tired, Passover, chilling, singing a song, woo, it's happy. And then he says something very not happy. The mood changes drastically, probably. Verse 27, Jesus said to them, you will, how many? All fall away. It's all going to happen. Not just doubting Thomas or Peter or whomever. No, every single one of you are going to do it. For it's written, and this is, of course, he's quoting here from Zechariah 13:7. He's loosely quoting, I will strike. Not, that is to say, he's making it sound like God the Father will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But it's a little different as Zechariah 13:7. But anyway, the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. So it's another way of Mark saying, Jesus is saying, what's going to happen is within the divine will. Don't be shocked. Don't think God the Father abandoned me forever. He has not. This is what's leading up to what's supposed to happen. All of them. I will go before you to Galilee. Remember, if you remember your end of your gospel, Mark chapter 16, verse 7, at the very, very end, when the angel's talking to the woman, he says, go tell my disciples and Peter I'll meet them in Galilee. So the point is, again, he said, I'm going to do it. And he'll come back later on to that. Now, Peter says to him, Jesus. I know you've got a bunch of buddy in the apostles who like to betray you. Even if they all fall away, I'm not going to do it. Jesus says to him, Pete, I want to tell you the truth. This very night, before the rooster crows twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. 3 times. But he strongly opposed it. If I must die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said the same. Now that's really, really good of them. Because Jesus said, if you want to become a disciple, you must pick up your cross and follow me. Those who lay down his life will save it. This is good news, like Jesus. Why do you fuss this woman? She should give the money to the poor. These are good answers. They're wrong in that regard. Here he says again, hey, if I'm going to die with you, I'm going to do it. I'm in it. We're going all in. And they all said the same. Everybody, oh yeah. We're all going to do it. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. Gethsemane is Aramaic. It means olive press. And
Means what?
olive press, press for, yeah. Olives are one of the number 1 exports of the area. And there's a traditional spot you can go to today that I think mainly the British run it. And it's so is pretty and picturesque, and it's got pretty flowers and sorry, I was thinking about the tomb. Sorry, I'll go to that later on. Gethsemane, you can go there today. It actually is a traditional spot, and it probably is the spot you can go to called this exact Gethsemane. Now, in Mark, it says the place called, a place. In the other Gospels, it's called a garden, but not in Mark's Gospel. Gethsemane is, if it is the same spot that's there today, is a small tract of land about the size, I say small, meaning it's not like a football field. I mean, I always picture some real big park, but it's not. It might be the layout of maybe the size of this whole house on the ground. if that long. And it's got, when I was there a few times, just a simple fence, 3 feet tall. And it has these old trees that are there. And some have been carbonate 2,000 years ago. Some of the trees still there could have been there when they were there. That's pretty cool to me. And we're walking, oh, that's Gethsemane. That's probably where I'm like, what? I mean, it's there. You can go on Google and search up Gethsemane and see the pictures. When I've preached on this text, I've showed the picture before. I just think that's really neat. But they go
You
there.
can go on Google and
Yeah, look up Gethsemane.
That'd be
Sure.
neat.
Look up the image for Gethsemane or Gethsemane, and absolutely, yeah, you'll see.
cool.
I think that's neat. I do. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." So he tells all the big group. And he took with him Peter and James and John. So there's 3 of the 4. And he didn't add Andrew, but the big 3. And they were the 3 who saw what before? Do you remember?
Peter, James, and John.
Uh-huh.
And Andrew. No.
Well, the big 3. What happened before that he invited just those 3? Do you remember?
The transformation.
The transfiguration, yeah, in Mark chapter 9. And there was the one who usually the most dim-witted. They're the ones who said, give us the seats of power. Give us the so-and-so. And people are like, oh, they're so special. It could also be the case that Jesus thinks they're not, they're so special. They can't grasp things. And he keeps trying to show them. Remember in Mark 9, remember the transfiguration, remember he says, this is my beloved son, listen to him. So the point isn't, way to go, peak, high five. It's the Father apparently needs to say, look at the lights. Listen to this guy. So it's not because these are his star pupils, but they're big characters in the narrative. But he took them, and he began to be greatly distressed and troubled. You might say that translation. He felt a lot of agony, terribly agony and distressed and troubled. And he said, my soul, that's interesting the way of saying that. Instead of just I feel, my soul feels very, does your word say sorrowful translation?
I'm full of sorrow.
Overwhelmed, grieved,
With sorrow.
overwhelmed
Point of death.
to the point of death? That's all good. Yeah. It's overwhelming. Pedalupos, yeah, my soul is just to the point of death. He's overwhelmed. Now, he could have used a term for I feel afraid, and it's used in many times in the gospel. He doesn't use that here. But my own feeling is he's using the agony and distress in the sense of he is panicked. So fear, I think, is okay to loosely translate. He's panicked. He's agonizing. I think that makes the most sense of the data. He's not feeling sorrowful, stressed because he's hungry or drank too much. It's because he knows what's about to happen. And the idea of that is overwhelming him, almost to the point of death. Remain here and watch. In Luke's gospel, it says he's so freaked out that he sweats like blood. And every single picture shows blood droplets. It didn't say he sweat blood. It said he sweat like blood, meaning like thick droplets. He's sweating a lot. That's the point. He's so overwhelmed. He's very, very overwhelmed. He says, stay here and watch. Now, grigoreti, that same word used in Mark 13 when he says, no one knows when the Son of Man will come, not even the Father, angels in heaven, but instead I tell you to what? Watch, be ready, be ready. It's the exact same Greek word. At the very end of that chapter, it says, basically the last thing I say to you is, be ready, be alert. It's the same thing here. They're supposed to be alert. Now, that's a key. In Mark 13, we're told that if they stay alert, they'll run to the hills if bad things happen. But if they do get caught, they should trust whom to talk to them. Holy Spirit's going to give you words to say. That's in the background here. So here they're supposed to remain here and watch. Now's that end times moment, that eschatological moment. Here's the time. We'll see how they do. Going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed. And this is typical Markan. He gives a summary and then tells us what he says. He prayed on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, that this hour might pass from him, or the hour might pass from him. And certainly he means the hour of crucifixion about to happen, that time period. And he said, Abba, Father. Abba is literally Aramaic, and Abba was sometimes used in Jewish communal prayers. It was rarely and probably never used at an individual Jew talking to God alone. That's weird. It's not weird to use the term Abba. It's really weird to use it as a personal address to God, because it is a little more like saying daddy. Again,
A child. To
right.
called his father.
Right. It's more like that. Now, it's not true that Abba only means daddy.
Yeah.
But when it's used on a one-to-one basis, yes, it typically does mean something like daddy. And you think about when babies, they say ba 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 ba. We think these primal, like mama. We take primal noises babies can make. And oh, he's talking about me. Dada, mama. Well, the Aramaic is Abba, and that can be something like daddy. But Jews could talk about God the Father as Abba, but they did it in communal worship texts, as it were. Like He is our Father. In fact, He teaches the disciples, you should say our Father, our Abba. But what we find in Mark's, in all of the Gospels, Jesus prefers to speak to God the Father specifically as Abba. And that is different in the ancient world. It is an intimacy that most people, Jews, didn't talk about. And of course, Mark knows that his audience doesn't know Aramaic. And so to say Abba, they go, what does that mean? So Abba, pater. Pater is the word father. And that's why he translates it. So literally, Jesus would not have said Abba, Abba. Right? He would have said Abba. But Mark translates that for us. All things are possible for you. You can do whatever you want, God, in general. Of course, remove this cup from me. That's another metaphor. The hour that's going to come, or the cup that's going to come. But it's not what I will, but what you will. That's a short, succinct, awesome prayer. I preached that for a long time. But it is a wonderful, that prayer changed my prayer life a long time ago. He starts out with who God is. He is Father. No matter how distressed and horrible, whatever the situation is, he doesn't say God's a villain, God disappeared, God's a punk. He calls him Father, Abba, Father. He talks to him with trust. And because he's God, he acknowledges his attributes. You can rescue me from the situation if you wanted to. He could somehow rescue him from the situation. And Jesus says, I know you can. Remember Jesus said, Mark 9, the guy comes down the mountain, Jairus' daughter. Remember that? He says, if you can. Jesus says, if you can. Anything is possible for the one who believes. And the man with Jairus' father's dad, remember the dad says, I believe, help my unbelief. Jesus said the problem is not whether you can, ever. It's whether you believe enough. Jesus is saying here, I do believe all things are possible with you. Jesus is saying toward the Father what he wanted those people to say to him. Does that make sense? So he's not being a hypocrite. He's saying exactly what he wanted people to say to Jesus. He wanted people to say, Jesus, all things are possible for you. Here's what I want. But not what I want, but what you want. No one ever did, but here's what Jesus says to his Father. So he acknowledges who God is, his Abba Father, acknowledges what he can do, and of course, then he gives his request. But he ends it with solidifying the fact that Jesus wants the same end as the Father. He doesn't want the same means to the end. It's very important. Jesus wants God the Father's will to be accomplished. He doesn't want to get at it the same way. That's it. Let's do it some other way. I want your will to be accomplished. Your will be not mine. I want to get to A to Z. I want to get to Z. But I don't want to go to D to E. Ain't going to work. Can we go D to 3 and then come back to X? Can we? And this is exactly, most scholars concur, I'm convinced of it. This is what it looks like to deny your will and pick up your cross. He is literally denying his will when he says, not what I will, but what you will. He's not saying I can't have a will. Denying your will is not saying I cannot have a will. Jesus has a will. His will is that he wants to do with God the Father's will, and he wills that it's a different way. I think it's true with us. God the Father didn't look at us, right? Didn't look at Tom and go, you can have no will ever. People sometimes say about prayer, I don't want to pray ever because it doesn't matter what. No. We have a will. He actually loves that about us. He created us to have free wills. He wants to know what our input is. But Jesus says what it means in Mark 8:38, to deny our will and pick up a cross is to say, but whatever I want, my will, it is subservient to yours. But if I have something that's different from you, I'm going to ask for it if I want to. But the end is going to be yours. So he is the perfect example of what it means to deny your will, literally pick up your cross, and do the Father's will. And he came and found them sleeping. So they're not watching, they're sleeping. They're not watching, they're sleeping. And he says to Peter, and it's interesting, he says, and it's so interesting to me because it seems so realistic and historical. He doesn't call Peter, because Peter's real name is Shimeon, or Simon in English. That's his real name. Peter is his nickname. So he doesn't call him Pete. I do all times and I'm being silly. He called him Simon. And he says, Simeon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch 1 hour? And it was just this short period of time, probably. I don't know if it looked at me at 60 minutes. Verse 38, I always picture like a parent talking to a child. Watch, like pick up your toys. Now, watch and pray that you may not enter in temptation. And what's the temptation?
Fall asleep.
To fall asleep again. And what's going to happen later on? He's going to deny him. The rest of him in denial. He's going to be tempted to deny Jesus. He's going to be tempted to fall asleep, to deny Jesus. What he should have been doing is watching and praying and relying on the Holy Spirit. And Jesus says that. The Spirit, the part of you makes decisions, is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. I'm convinced that's also of an insight to what Jesus was feeling. Part of him wants to not go through he doesn't want to go accomplish God's will through the cross. That part is weak. And the only way you could possibly have the strength to do it, to follow the willing part, is to pray, is to watch out for fight temptation. I think, let me say it this way, I think Jesus is genuinely tempted not to do God the Father's will. The strategy, the means to the end. It's a real temptation. He's fighting the temptation by praying. He's watching and vigilant. He's looking at, I know temptation's coming. Here it comes. I attack it by praying. That's exactly what he wants Simon and the dudes to watch too. They want to watch out to make sure some bad guys don't come get them. Let me know when they're coming.
But
Well,
again, what you said is that they didn't know this very.
yeah, they don't know the future, but they're also being disobedient to their master. That's right. They don't know. Yeah. Again, he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again, he can't find them sleeping. And I that's a good point, Vanna. And I also think we're supposed to see this as, in my opinion, that Jesus, but I think in the narrative level, we're supposed to see it as Jesus didn't get an answer yet. So when he keeps going back, is this what you want? Like, here's a time, man, I have a feeling they're going to come get me. Yes or no? Yes or no? Is it time to run? Is it time to stick in there? What's the answer? Now, in Mark's gospel, we never hear back. He's arrested, and that matters a lot, I think, for the tension of the story. Their eyes were heavy. I love Mark's excuse for them. They didn't know what to answer him. Like, Jesus, dude, I don't know what to say. I'm sleepy, man. I want you freaking out. We're just praying, just had communion. We're about to go back to Bethany and have a nap. I mean, why are you so upset? What's going on? They don't know what to say. It came a third time. Are you still sleeping and take your rest? And that Greek word is something, it is enough. Apikai can mean something like, it's an accounting term. It's like saying the total's time's up. That you've reached the total's up. It's time's up in that sense. It's enough. It's enough. Hours come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See my betrayer's right hand. Is at hand. That exact same Greek word, at hand, egeking, is that what your translation says? It's the exact same word he said in Mark 1:14-15. Be repenting, be believing, because the good news, the gospel of God is at hand. The kingdom of God is at hand. It has come upon us right now. And while he's speaking, Judas came, and chaos ensues. One of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs. And that's important. It's not in Matthew's gospel. These are leaders from the Sanhedrin, the temple. In John's gospel, they're a Roman army and a legion. Not in Mark's gospel. In Mark's gospel, he portrays them as a mob.
Sent from the chief priest.
Right. But that's right. But this crowd acts like a mob because I think on a narrative level, Mark's letting us know the crowd is now turning on Jesus. They were big fans when he came in. This character called crowd, as it were. There's swords and clubs. And they come for the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. The guys are so happy here. Now, there's no torches. And in other Gospels, they talk about how they torches. This is all in the darkness here. And it's probably a little metaphor that it's all dark. Betrayer to give them a sign saying, the one I shall kiss is the man. Seized him and lead him away under the guard. And when he came, he went up at once and said, Master! He looked at Rabbi, my great master. He kissed him. Of course, the betrayal, like eating food with him, it's a friendly kiss. They laid hands on him and they seized him. But listen to this. But one of those who stood by. Mark portrays this as someone else, like a random stander by, or maybe a disciple from a distance, or maybe the crowd. He's probably trying to emphasize it gets chaos real fast. And the other Gospels emphasize this is, of course, who does it?
Peter.
They say Peter grabbed the sword. Even John gives the name, Malchus's ear. But Mark's Gospel is more like pandemonium, he's trying to say. Someone grabs the sword like, it was time to fight, we're going crazy. But in Mark's Gospel, it's not Peter. It's not emphasized. It's just one of those who were near him. He struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. And there's no gospel here. There's no reference like it is in John's Gospel that he healed it, all that stuff. It's pandemonium. Jesus says, have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching. You didn't seize me, but let the scripture be fulfilled. And they all forsake him, and they all fled. They all forsook him and fled. That's exactly what he said would happen. Probably to make it a little funny, and probably to emphasize how they all fled, this bizarre thing happens in the next two verses. A young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him, but left the linen cloth and ran away naked. And it could be a lot. Scholars give all kinds of reasons. Like, why did you put this? It probably has something to do with the fact that it is a way of saying everybody took off. Even random people, they struck down naked to get away from this stuff. Everybody. Some think that this character is Mark himself. We don't know. I mean, it might be a way Mark's putting himself into the story. Maybe so. I also take this kind of metaphorical that Jesus is exposed from now into the tomb. Like almost like a living parable. And this guy gets ripped off naked and runs off exposed. There's no more teaching. There's no more healing. There's no more miracles. None of that stuff. Jesus is completely in the hands of the people he called the sinners. Why don't we stop there, because this next scene is awesome and it's long and we're out of time. And let's stop there and we'll come back next time and talk about that. But what questions, comments do you have for me? Anything at all before we wrap up?